Right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. This is our PatternFly community meeting, and we host this meeting monthly to keep you up to date with everything PatternFly related. After this meeting today, I will post the meeting on YouTube, and so feel free to share that out with any folks you believe would be interested. Today, we have a relatively packed agenda, so we will hear from a number of different teams working on PatternFly. We have updates from content, infrastructure, React, accessibility, and core. And we also have a little information about the current effort to build a PatternFly date and time picker. So I know that's been a relatively highly anticipated feature. So to kick things off, we'll start with content. Jake, I believe you are going first. Hand the controls to you.
Thanks. Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I will be talking about the blog audit and migration that has recently happened within the content team for moving PatternFly's blog. As many of you have heard over the last month or so, we've made an effort to move the PatternFly blog from the old WordPress website to the new Medium website. It was announced in June, and since then we've kind of undergone a big overhaul. And as of yesterday, everything has been officially moved. We chose Medium because, as Abby said, Medium is a great platform for us to connect with a wider audience and share PatternFly with more people. So the moving process involved 4 steps. First, we audited and reviewed all the blog articles. Then we migrated them by determining which were most useful and relevant and moving those ones to Medium. Then we tagged them, branding each article and making them accessible from the Medium homepage. And finally, we redirected them so the old PatternFly blog no longer exists, and if you try to go to it, it'll automatically direct to the Medium blog. So first step, audit. We reviewed old blog articles from as far back as 2015 and documented them all in a spreadsheet and made preliminary decisions on which ones to keep, to move over, and which ones to not move over based on what was in their content, their research, if they had important PatternFly updates, and how well they translated from a PatternFly 3 to a PatternFly 4 context. The next step was migration, and we did this process together. So the first step of migration was to have a joint decision and talk with, you, the PatternFly experts. So reviewing all of the articles in our decisions, asking what matters to PatternFly, what we need to preserve our past, and what we need to build on it. In the end, we ended up saving 40 articles, and we moved them over to the new Medium account, trying to maintain as much authorial integrity as possible. So preserving as much of your original language as we could, and making as few changes as possible so that the articles stayed intact. After everything had been migrated, it was time to tag them, to find a place where we could collect all of this past memory and create a history that was accessible to our readers. So the first step was to preserve them and create a digital archive of them. And we wanted everything in one place for easy access. We wanted everything to be consistent for our readers and our users. And then we wanted it to be more visible too. We wanted to bring branding to it so that old friends, these old articles, could have new eyes on them. So when we were thinking about branding, we wanted a tag and an image. So a tag to kind of collect all of the articles in one place. We wanted it to be catchy. We wanted to celebrate our past accomplishments and honor our history while showing growth. The image, we also wanted to show this growth and honor our history, but we wanted it to be kind of retro-looking, eye-catching, and on-brand so that people would pay attention to it. And so this is what we came up with. Our tag is Pattern Past, and this is our logo. PatternFly Vintage Blog established 2015. It's kind of fun. Got a nice vintage vibe. So if you go to our Medium blog right now, you can see Pattern Past is up. You can click on it there, or at the bottom of our homepage, you can scroll down and see that there is a button where you can explore Pattern Past. And either way, it'll take you to this page, which has all of our Pattern Past articles collected, all branded and tagged so that they are all together. And of course, the last step was redirecting, so making the old WordPress blog out of date by making sure all new visits to the website were automatically redirected to Medium. So as of yesterday, thank you, Dana, this has been completed. So if you do try to go to blog.patternfly.org right now, it will redirect you automatically to our Medium website. So this helps us ensure that returning readers will be able to find our old articles on their new home. So check it out. You can follow these links to go to the Medium page and to read all of our Pattern Past articles. We also just tweeted about it on our PatternFly Twitter account, so go show the tweet some love. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have Alana presenting for some content as well.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Awesome. So as Jake said, we officially said goodbye to WordPress, but we said hello to new submission guidelines. So I'm excited to share with you guys the process we went through to define and create those and then put them live up on Medium. So it all started with a Google Doc, or actually several Google Docs. So submitting to Medium used to be fairly complicated. Finding documentation took a little more time because writers had to search for a topic submission form and then search into separate documents for our best practices. And this multi-layered Google Doc experience made it a little bit difficult for people, especially non-Red Hatters, to get involved, especially since external flyers couldn't access our internal Google documentation. So this lengthened the submission process and made it a little bit less accessible for everybody. Not to mention, because we didn't have a centralized place with all of our content guidelines, editors often had to reformat or restructure articles once they went live on Medium. So we wanted to find a way to streamline this experience and allow authors to have more ownership of that process they went through, from topic creation all the way through to article publication. And in order to do that, we decided to look at some other successful Medium publications and what they were doing right in their submission guides and how we could learn from that and fold that into our own. So we looked at several different popular Medium publications, and we found 4 main consistencies across all of their submission guidelines. All of them created a cohesive brand experience through brand voice, strong content opinions, Oxford comma versus not, etc., and example subject areas. So they drew upon existing content in their own publication to inspire new content. They also gave structural guidance in terms of what elements actually form a story, everything from a title, subtitle, to the actual body copy itself. And they gave formatting best practices to help writers really hone in on how to make their articles not only more accessible, but more readable. And they ended each submission guideline document with a community call to action. So why should people submit to this publication? What do they accomplish by adding their voice to this mosaic? So using these tactics, we wanted to spread our wings and shape our own public-facing guidelines. So to do this, we defined 3 goals: to encourage, educate, and expand. We want to inspire our readers to join our conversation and add their story to our growing content community. We want to educate by providing a source for writing and editing expertise, so we can not only facilitate more confidence, but facilitate more comfort with writing for our open source community. And we want to expand our submission process to make it accessible for all flyers, not just people who have access through Google Docs on Red Hat. So by expanding this, making this on a centralized public-facing platform, we can invite all flyers to contribute together. And our new guidelines consist of 3 main components. We walk through topics, submission process, and content. So our topics section goes through the open source and UX focus areas we have and what we feature, and we provide hyperlinks to existing articles like those other content submission guidelines did, so we can help people see how they can take their ideas and their stories and frame them in a PatternFly way, in a way that engages our readers and in a way that they can be proud of. We walk through our step-by-step submission process, everything from filling out our pitching topic form all the way through submitting. And then we walk through our content guidelines. So things like article structure, the language, voice, and tone that we use, different formatting best practices, and how to properly credit and use alternative text for images. And something that I'm proud of, and I'm sure Jake and Abby are also proud of as well, is that our drafting process was pretty iterative. So we went through several different versions of what the submission guidelines might look like. And our original draft featured a lot of puns, PatternFly references, and a playful brand voice. And while that really honed in on the collaborative and fun spirit we have as a community, we decided to dial this back for multiple reasons. And the main reason we chose to do this was so our guidelines could read less like an article and more like concrete documentation. If our contributors are trying to find specific information, we don't want them to have to sift through a lot of fun copy to find what's actually useful. So we wanted to make our content as scannable and quickly findable as possible. And we also wanted to make sure that our submission guidelines weren't about showcasing our voice, but about amplifying yours, our communities. And something really cool about our migration effort running in tandem with our submission effort is we were able to test the stylistic choices we made during our WordPress migration. So we were able to apply style guidelines that we maybe weren't quite sure about yet to our migrated articles to see how well they'd carry over. So if you go to our pattern pass section, you'll notice some of our WordPress articles that previously had standalone links now incorporate those in-text hyperlinks, and images now have alternative text. So we really had an opportunity here to put these guidelines into practice and kind of make sure that they were usable before we launched. So the next step was to take flight and make our submission guidelines public. So for you guys to write and submit in style for our Medium publication, our guidelines now live in the top toolbar of our Medium page for easy access, and a hyperlink to them also appears in the boilerplate copy we use at the bottom of every article we publish. We wanted to make sure it's accessible from multiple avenues, so there's no chance for anybody to be lost or not know where they can find this content. And something really exciting is we'll be updating our guidelines with branded images. So right now, if you navigate to our submission guidelines, you'll find that we use an image from Medium's Unsplash source, which is by and large fairly topic-oriented, but we'd like to make this more of an immersive PatternFly experience like we did with that Pattern Pass logo. So keep your eyes peeled in the coming weeks because we'll add more of a PatternFly experience to our guidelines. And something really exciting and something with a lot of potential to grow is that these guidelines are published actually as a Medium story themselves. So we can return to them and update them as we see fit. And this really establishes them as an evergreen resource for us as we publish. So we can evolve these guidelines and change them not only as our content community grows, but as Medium's interface grows and progresses too. So this is a screen grab from our Medium landing page. You'll see the pattern passed in the top toolbar as well, and there's a blue box around that Write With Us link that will bring you right to the submission guidelines. And this is the part where I encourage you to write with us. So throughout the summer, we've had a content initiative to amplify our community voices and really source a lot of our content from our community itself. And to do this, we decided we would also revise that boilerplate copy that includes a link to our guidelines at the bottom of our articles. So in the past, our boilerplate copy read, "Have a UX story of your own? Send your ideas our way. More writers and fresh perspectives can only make PatternFly's Medium publication stronger." And while this was 100% true and in keeps with our brand and our mission, it centered that submission on our publication and how it benefited us. And we wanted to turn this back and make it really about our contributors. So we revised this, and you'll see it at the bottom of any news story we publish, saying, "Have a story of your own? Write with us. Our community thrives on diverse voices. Let's hear yours." So let's share the pen. We're actively looking for flyer submissions so we can have a community narrative driven by your stories. And these submission guidelines are a huge way to get everyone on board and on the same page. And one really exciting opportunity for this is our new Flyer Fridays campaign. So if you've kept your eye on our Twitter or email channels, you may have seen a tweet or email go out in the past week about this new Twitter tag. And it's an opportunity every week to feature community-nominated flyers and give them an opportunity to celebrate not only who they are and what they do, but how they're using PatternFly. And something with this tag as well is there's an opportunity for a profile interview or feature style piece on our Medium publication itself. And I just want to stress, if you want to write or want to contribute but don't know where to start, reach out to our content team. We are so excited to help you guys on this content journey. And writing articles can be a daunting task. Writer's block happens to everybody, but being able to facilitate that content creation and get everybody excited and proud to share their PatternFly story is really at the core of what our Medium publication is all about. So this is a link to our pitch form. You can click that to get to our topic form, and you can write what you'd like to write about, or if you don't have a direction, you can even say, this is the topic I'd like to write about, and I'd like more guidance on it. And then this is a link to our guidelines itself where you can help shape our story. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alana and Jake. Very exciting updates. Okay. Now we're going to move to the infrastructure team, and Zach has some updates for us.
Yeah, hi. Do you want to do the slides?
Certainly can. Here, one moment. You pull them up.
Wonderful. Yeah, hello everyone. So the infrastructure team has not been doing a ton of PatternFly related things, but one big PatternFly thing we're doing is the patternfly.org redesign. And as soon as you see the slides, I think you'll understand what's happening. Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. Boom. Well, sorry, previous one. There, this one. So components or documentation is now grouped by components. So right now, Core has its own documentation for table, React has its own documentation for table, and then finally there's some design guidelines for how to use a table, and they're all under separate sections of the website currently. But this redesign aims to unify them and put them all under the same page, and then have tabs that switch between them and this kind of dynamic table of contents on the right side. So there's a lot of engineering work underway to do this, and yeah, it's a lot. So next slide. Yeah, so we have to not only group these pages, but we have to redo the routes, because now it doesn't make any sense for like design guidelines or documentation core or documentation React to be the prefix for the URLs, because now it's grouped by component rather than by like the source, which would be core React design guidelines. And we also need finer control over the markdown for table captions, which is something that design wants to support, and I think would be really good for some examples that are more complicated. And for accordion headers, which now will take H2 elements and create an accordion component for them that has the content underneath. Yeah, so there's a lot of engineering that has to go on behind the scenes to support this for everything, because it's not like we're using separate files for all our markdown, and we want to change the repos as little as possible to support this. So next slide. Yeah, so this is how it affects people who contribute to PatternFly docs. So we're back to H3s for example names, which was what initially happened after the move to Markdown, but we moved to doing the title equals after the code block. But now we're back to H3s so that we can add these example captions and know where these example captions should be. And also a smaller kind of quality of life change is that meta text, which is what comes after the backtick JS, the JSX attribute equals value. That's now parsed properly as JSX attributes. So you can put anything you want in there, and you have to quote string values, which wasn't always done, but I've gone and fixed for all of our existing docs. And this is the other change is that there's now an ID assigned to each doc file instead of a title. And that ID is something that's shared across core, React, and org. And I'll publish a list of IDs for you guys because we have them in a spreadsheet. And that way you know what a component should be called across all three repos. And moving forward, I think we're going to try to name our components the same thing and not, call one about modal in React and then about modal box in core. Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. Yeah, and so this is something I want contributors to get excited about, which is we're going to get much better workspaces. So right now we're using Gatsby, and Gatsby has a lot of problems, to put it lightly. But we really don't need Gatsby if we're going to support these changes, and it's difficult to make Gatsby work with a custom markdown pipeline that can support those example captions. So the replacement's unified JS and to use Webpack directly instead of through Gatsby. And it allows us to do things like proper hot reloading, which makes developer experiences much better. The build times are down from about 8 minutes in CI to 30 seconds. And that's done in part by having core export HTML instead of export handlebars, which then is rebuilt by the theme, so it's getting built twice. And it also allows us to support MDX 2.0, which is landing sometime this year, which has better parsing, lots of new features. It's much better than the original one. And that will be coming after the org redesign ships. We'll spend some time porting over those changes to the core and React repos. Ooh, all right, that's a lot. Any questions? All right. Oh, it'll also probably land next sprint. It'll be live on org. And so, yeah, we'll need people to test it and find all the broken links beforehand. So stay tuned for that.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much, Zach. All right, now we have a handful of new React features and updates. I think Titani is going to kick us off there.
Yeah, hi, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm going to take us through a couple of updates that we have in React. So the first one I'll show you is the alert update. We added a timeout to the alert. Here's the demo. So this first alert has an 8-second timeout, and the second one has a 16-second timeout. And in order to set the timeout on the alert, we added this prop, which can either take a number or a Boolean. If you set it to true, then the alert would default to 8 seconds. And if you want a custom timeout, you can set it to a number value, which would be milliseconds of how long you want the timeout to be. Okay, so that's it for the alert. And then also Boaz added an update to the button component. We now have a small variation of the button. So over here you can see the small variation versus what the default size of the button would be. And for that you just set the small prop. And then in addition, we have added the warning state to form and form inputs. So here's an example in the form select component. I choose this valid option. I go back and choose, just choose a number. It tells you, it shows the warning state, and the text is also modified to be in the color of the warning state. And that was also added to the text area. So that's the warning state there. And also here in form, we have an example of the text input. And again, we can see the warning state here. You click off, you can see the underline of the warning state. And that's all I had. Any questions? All right.
Next is Joachim. What do you got for us?
So last sprint, there were a couple PRs that went into essentially rewrite the tooltip and the popover to use the positioning engine Popper.js directly instead of depending on what we had before, which was Tipi.js, which in itself actually used Popper.js under the hood. But essentially, that had been causing us trouble for a while now because we were not able to control the DOM directly with Tipi.js, and in some respects we had to kind of put in some hacks to, for example, style the arrow component that was provided by Tipi.js, and it did not allow us to use our own arrow component. So if you were to look at the DOM previously, it would look pretty bad. So so effort went into basically redo it the proper way. It fixed several bugs along the way. But visually, there should be no major changes. I mean, there shouldn't be any changes really, except for a bug fix related to, again, the arrow. Before, if a tooltip or a popover disappeared, sometimes you would see the arrow part of it lagging behind. So that was just one of the bugs that got squashed with this PR. But like I said, the behavior should be unchanged. The API stayed the same. You should still have all of your accessibility options, keyboard shortcuts, etc. If you enter into it, you should see, for example, the close button being highlighted. You can escape out of it. So that stayed all the same. If you look at the tooltip, we did add, so here's the tooltip demo page. If you look here, we did add a more extensive playground. That's the third example right here, and it basically exposes several of the options that you have available to you when you use the tooltip. And a lot of these also apply to the popover, so there's some crossover. But for example, right now we've got a tooltip here, and just to demonstrate one of the features of the tooltip, which is the flip functionality. Right now it's enabled. If I scroll up, you can see that the tooltip will respond to hitting that boundary. If you don't want that, you can always disable that, and it'll just go up like this. There are also several other options that you can see here and play around with. Instead of just, if flip is enabled, which is the default, instead of just flipping to the opposite area, you can also define the behavior of the flip. So for example, if you pass in an array for flip, in this case, it'll try to go first to the top position, and if it runs out of space there, it'll go to the right. If it runs out of space there, it'll go to the bottom, etc. So you can definitely define the behavior how you want it to be. In this case, from the top, it'll first flip to the right, and then if it runs out of space there, it'll flip to the bottom. So this just kind of will help you understand the different props that you have available to you. And then as an added bonus, since version 4.32.8, there's one more prop that was added to both the tooltip and the popover, which is the reference prop. And instead of passing the element that the tooltip is wrapping as a child, now you don't necessarily need that. For example, if you don't have direct control over the component that you want to apply the tooltip to, maybe it's out of the scope of your project. Maybe it's in the sidebar or masthead that is contributed by another project. You can just reference that element. In this case, I have a button here that is actually outside of the tooltip component. It lives as a sibling right next to it. And just using the reference prop, you can just find a reference to it. In this case, I'm using a document selector, but you could actually also use like a React ref. So if you have a React ref to that button or a diff wrapping that button, you can also use a React ref in the same way and The tooltip should work as you would expect it to. And that's all I have. Any questions? Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, now we have Jenny. What have you got for us, Jenny?
All right, just gonna share my screen. All right, so a new feature that was added in the most recent release was a new prop called isStickyHeader. So that is in the table component, and if that's at the true, then the table header will stick to the top of its container, and that looks something like this. So just up here, you see that you still see the title and the description of each column. And yeah, that's it for me.
All right. Now my turn. So, all right. Two changes were made to the dropdown and select components. They were very similar to each other. Both dropdown options and select options have a new property called description. And when you add the description to the option, it adds a smaller little descriptive text under the option, styled just right. So this is on the dropdown component here, and it's also demonstrated in the select component documentation as well. And you can see in the code that to create that, they just passed a new description property to the select option component, and that's it. Right. Next, we are going to go to Jessie with our accessibility update.
Hello, let me go ahead and share my screen. So I wanted to point out a couple of different PRs that have gone through lately that I think that are really cool for the accessibility stance. One of them is notification drawer, which Juntao worked on. And the big thing here is he helped update a lot of the keyboard accessibility. A lot of the different toggles that were in the notification drawer weren't working properly for keyboard users. So he made sure that that was enabled so that you have the group action, but then also the children actions as well. He kind of describes some of the changes he makes. And then the additional thing that I really like that he added is some testing. So he added some accessibility tests, which is something that we've been trying to add slowly over time to a lot of our components to make sure that our accessibility stays over time and that we don't have regressions in the future. So he made sure to add these accessibility tests onto our notification drawer. So not only is it accessible now, but hopefully it'll continue being accessible in the future. The other one that I wanted to point out is Wizard. It hasn't gone through yet, but it seems like it's on the verge of being merged, so I really wanted to point it out. There has been some keyboard accessibility issues with Wizard for a while, and so we finally got these fixed. I think I got off of it. But essentially the left side panel wasn't accessible earlier, and so now we have a completely keyboard accessible panel. The contents are accessible, and then also we've made some changes to the aria labels for screen readers. There was some additional labeling that helped when you're in screen readers to navigate through the wizard, understanding not only what these steps do, but what the content does. Overall, there's been a pretty great overhaul of some of these accessibility features towards Wizard. This has also brought up an interesting conversation, and part of the reason why it's stayed out for a bit is we've had discussions on our aria-label strategy, and we want to make sure that not only our examples are accessible, but what you're viewing, you take, and then make it accessible on your site as well. So we've been really discussing how is the best way to add aria labels to all future content, and then have it encouraged within product to add these aria labels. It's been one of our biggest issues we've noticed with products is adding aria labels and adding good ones that actually give users context if they can't actually see the screen like a visual user. Some interesting changes on the core side. There was an aria-label added to the help button, just a quick fix. And then there was actually a really interesting find that Michael Coker found in terms of the screen reader only class that we have. He pointed out a bug that was happening in drawer and then was discussing with me some of the things that were happening with this in terms of the transform and the positioning of this screen reader only class. And since he is up next, I actually think that I'm going to pass it over to him if he wants to explain it further. He has a lot of insight into how the CSS actually functions and the coordination works with it. So, Michael, if you want to go ahead and take the screen.
Thank you. Is that cool, Nicole? I don't want to.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I don't want to skip you.
No.
Okay.
I'll go after.
Let's see. Okay. All right. So I guess I'll mention real quick the change that Jessie had just mentioned was that we have a screen reader only class. It's a common kind of thing that you see in a lot of systems that will hide text visually for sighted users, but leaves the text accessible in the document as far as things like assistive technologies like screen readers to be able to find the text and read it aloud. So cases where you might use that is if there's something that's the meaning of something is easily conveyed to a sighted user just by looking at a page, maybe a color is represented or there's an icon or something like that. But to a non-sighted user, they wouldn't see that. And so you might want to add some descriptive text around that element to describe what some more information around that thing. And a lot of these screen reader only classes, they kind of follow a pattern. There's a lot of position absolute, top negative 9,000 pixels, that kind of thing to hide that text visually and just throw it off the page. But you leave certain CSS properties alone so that screen readers don't omit it as well. And so we had a pattern for that, and it was to use some positioning properties like position fixed, uses a clip as a means to create a small little box for the text and then just hide any overflow. So that sort of thing. And our screen reader only class did not have position, I'm not sure what you'd call them, but the top, left, right, and bottom properties defined to position it anywhere because the other properties on the class would hide all of the text that was in it on the page as it was. And we noticed this pretty obscure thing. It was only happening in Chrome to where when you apply a CSS transform to an element, that creates a new local coordinate system for that element. And so an element with position fixed would normally be position fixed relative to the overall window. But an element that is position fixed inside of an element that has a transform applied is fixed relative to that element's, the element with transform. And if you also apply a couple of magic properties to that, to the element with position, or I'm sorry, with transform, the fixed elements, even though they're not visible on the screen, they can cause scroll bars to appear because they're overflowing the element with the transform. And so just a small update, we added a top and a left of 0 property to the screen reader class, which positions it inside of the box that it would be position fixed relative to. That keeps it from ever overflowing that element. No other changes. The text was already invisible, that sort of thing. Works with screen readers and all of that. So in case anyone's come across that obscure bug, maybe that's fixed now. So give that a shot. Okay, we've got a lot of things, so I'll try just to go through this one pretty quickly. So just some updates from the core side and some design kind of stuff too that we've implemented. First off is we now have an SCSS flag to omit what could be a problematic CSS property that we apply in our global CSS, depending on how you import PatternFly, how you use it, maybe with another design system, that sort of thing. And so we apply HTML to the HTML element font size unset. I believe there might be an important value in the declaration as well. That's something that was specific to using PatternFly 3 and PatternFly 4 together. That can cause problems. Important can definitely cause problems for sure. So we had a use case for needing to remove that. And so now if you compile your Sass for PatternFly core CSS, you can set this, clicking takes you to the next slide, just learned that. You can set this Sass flag. You would set it to true. It's false by default, and so if you set this to true, then you'll omit that HTML font size declaration. Up next, just a small change to the website and to a demo that we had that uses a drawer to create, uses a drawer to create a two-panel layout where you have maybe a smaller panel with items that allow you to drill down to a larger panel that displays more content about the items in the smaller panel. We had previously called this a master detail layout or pattern. It's now called primary detail. So you'll see that change on the website under the core documentation, under demos, primary detail. We added the ability to select, to favorite items inside of the select menu components, menu items. This is very similar to a feature that we have on the app launcher. It was a pre-existing pattern. We just applied this to the select component as well. These updates have not quite made their way to React yet, so this is kind of a heads up as this is available in core, and it's slated to be completed in React. So just something to look forward to. So these should be coming pretty soon. We have a new modal width variation. It's called medium. We had a small and a large before, no medium, so now we have a medium. And you can see the dimensions listed there. It's about 850 pixels, whatever that would be in a rim value. We have a new variation of the button. We're calling it call to action. It's actually called PF-m-display large is the variant name. And so this is more for, say, a marketing or website sort of context as opposed to an application, just a larger call to action type of button. There are the variations for it. In the table component, you can now add an icon in column headers that is used to trigger a popover for help, more information, that sort of thing. So you can see it here in this table in the branches column and the last commit column. So that's really cool. We've had a lot of requests for that, and that's on its way to making it into the React table component as well. We updated our global success color from a green to a slightly different green. The old green was pretty dark. It's technically green, but when you apply it to text, this success alert title text, and then this is helper text success input, text below the text input. Those are both the old green. And if you look below, this is the new green. And it's obviously a more visible green color. And so we updated that as a global variable in the system. As I mentioned with the call to action button variation, we've implemented a new concept in PatternFly, and it's a modifier concept that will apply to multiple components. And it's basically something that we'll use to create a larger variation of something, not necessarily just in size, but it would be for a variation that might have more space that you might use in more of a marketing concept or a website kind of use case for a component. And you can kind of contrast that to compact variations that we currently have. And that's just for the compact variation, something with a little bit less space, tends to be a little more application focused. You got a lot of data on the page that needs to be able to display, and with whatever the real estate is. Marketing context, things tend to be a little more spacious, spaced out, padding, larger text, that sort of thing. So at the bottom, you can see the call to action variation that we already covered, but also we have a new tile component, and this is the large, display large variation of the tile component above. We now have a notification drawer demo in the core documentation, so that's great. We had a notification drawer component and a drawer component, and we had drawer demos previously that just showed the drawer functionality and how you implement that in context of the overall page. Well, now we have notification drawer inside of there, and so you can see how that should be placed, laid out, that sort of thing. So we have a few different variations of the notification drawer in that subset of demos, so that's really cool. We now have an awesome new component called description list, and this is the traditional DL element, if anyone's familiar with that. And so you have a term and a description. It's a key value sort of pair. And so you can see examples below. There's a lot of really fancy examples that I would definitely encourage you to check out, because this top example doesn't do it justice, but lots of great layout options for representing a definition list. So I encourage you to check that out. That should be coming up in React pretty soon as well. As I mentioned previously, with the new display concept that we have as variation for components, this is the new tile component. Very similar to a card, but a little bit different than a card. And so you get a few different variations of the tile component. I encourage you to check that one out as well. Give us your feedback. We also have a new component called hint, kind of like an alert, or an inline alert or a static alert, but a little bit different. So I encourage you to check that one out as well. Got a number of variations in the examples page on the documentation. We have a new fancy component called the search input, and it's basically a search box with a lot of really cool functionality. So a super custom thing. We have a simple search input that you can use with our existing form control component. If you just need a simple search that's a regular text input, nothing fancy. I think it has a magnifying glass icon, but this gives you all sorts of functionality. You can get the result count. You have a navigation to be able to go up and down within a list of search results. You can clear the search input, that sort of thing. So encourage you to check that out. That's a pretty cool one. And then that's pretty much it. We've also got some in-progress stuff that I guess get an honorable mention in this list that we're still working out. We've got tree view, which is great. A lot of people have requested that. That's going to be a really good addition to the library. Really looking forward to that one. Skeleton loading, that's really cool too. A lot of people use that, and PatternFly didn't have a pattern for it, and so we have one, and we're implementing it. Really looking forward to getting that in. We have a toggle button group, and so I've seen a lot of use cases of applications using our existing buttons to create something like that, and so we're going to actually have a component that gives you the behavior that you want and a really nice layout. So that's really cool. And then something that we've been talking about for a while, it's finally hitting the ground, is the ability to limit the content on the page. So for users who have super wide screens, if you have a form on that screen currently without some custom override, the form is going to span the entire width of the content section. So we like to give up the users the ability to limit that with a reasonable max width that you can apply easily just using PatternFly to elements like that in your application. And that's it. Any questions?
All right. Thank you so much. The last update we have for you is sort of a preview. There's been some work finally started to build a date and time picker. This last sprint, a proof of concept was built, and so core has begun building out some of the CSS. Just to give you a little background, so the date and time picker requirements. There are quite a few that we wanted to build into any components coming from PatternFly. We want the ability to include a single date or a single time or a combined date and time in our picker. We also wanted to allow ranges and both US and international date formats. We want to support 12-hour and 24-hour time and allow for time zone selection. So with all of these requirements in mind, I spent some time building out a React proof of concept. Used a few different third-party tools to build the proof of concept. It's currently utilizing Flatpicker as its date picker, or as some of the underlying technology for date picker. It uses Moment.js and Moment Time Zone to deal with times. And I was able to demo about 70% of the requirements actually working in the proof of concept and describe its capability of meeting the remaining requirements. That is technically not code that's running anywhere for you to view, but there is a branch that it's on, and if you are particularly curious to see the proof of concept, I'm happy to share the link to that with you. But also, PatternFly Core is taking that right now and experimenting with building upon the proof of concept to see if to make the CSS match the designs. And so I've linked the issue that they are currently working on, which has some of the links to the proof of concept code and the design docs. And there also is already an issue open in React to implement the component once the core work is done. And there's also a link to that issue if you'd like to see and watch it as it's getting built. We're certainly interested in any input. If people have other requirements they're really hoping to see in this component, it would be great to know them now while we're in the early stages. But hopefully within the next few releases, we'll be able to see a working date and time picker. So that is very exciting. Does anybody have any questions right now? Okay. Well, we are almost out of time. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me or any of the presenters you saw today, and I will post this meeting to YouTube and send out the recording very shortly. Thank you for your time, everybody. Have a good day.